Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 1st of June 2024. Thank you so much for coming to join in with finding out what's going on the map. I am joined in the background. You can't see him. He's lurking in the depths of the studio. JR, who's just done the mapping, so thank you so much to him. He is going to look at if there's any comments that or questions you guys have that are pertinent that could be interesting for me to go through. He is a legend. We all know that. He just shot me a message earlier to say, right, I've done a mapping, mate. Are you going to do a live? And I'm like, oh god, I am behind. I might as well do a live on the mapping. So here we are. This is completely last minute, and as such, my preparation has been somewhat lacking. So apologies if you don't get as much clarity from me as you usually get, and that's not to say I usually give you clarity. So let's go to the map. Indeed, we'll go to what I normally show you, which is the key to the mapping. If you don't know what the lines mean, please check that out. The map here gives us an indication there's quite an active day on the front lines in a number of places compared to a relatively quiet couple of days, although interestingly no change to that northern area, which I think is incredibly significant. That yet again there is stability there. Although there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of fighting taking place. There's been these claims that the Russians have had to draw some troops away from here. I'm in danger of just repeating myself again from what I said yesterday and the day before, which is if the Russians are using this to primarily as a way of diverting Ukrainian troops away from the front line to give themselves a higher ratio and an advantage, then taking your own troops away from the front line is a complete negation of that objective. And of course, it might not be the only objective, so you are trying to achieve other things, but if that's part of it, then you are pretty much going to have failed unless you are drawing those troops from areas that you know you're not going to attack, and you're hoping that the Ukrainians take troops from other places where you are going to attack. But it's all quite messy, and there are claims that the Russians are bringing reinforcements. They are going to try and go again there, but they haven't used large amounts of mechanized equipment, which when you are trying to work out what their objectives are outside of changing those ratios, if they are to take a lot of land, get a buffer zone that's sizable, then they are not committing the right kind of equipment in order to achieve that in a suitable time period. It just seems to be, I don't know. Again, like I keep saying, am I being too positive, etc., etc.? But I just can't get around that this is not a very well thought through attack. And if the Ukrainians can now hit them with HIMARS, then that's going to change things. Now, we understand that the Ukrainians can't use ATACMS. That's a real shame. So let's put on, it's great to have the map here when I'm talking about this stuff now, actually, because we can look at how far they can fire with HIMARS. So there we have a 56-kilometer range from sort of where you would safely put a HIMARS. So the regular kind of missiles you'll use in HIMARS will be able to get you all that distance. Now, that is pretty decent. You're not going to necessarily need ATACMS. You might want some cluster ability to hit certain targets, but HIMARS on their own should give you a really changed effect in this area, and I think that is going to really help the Ukrainians. It's not ideal that they don't have ATACMS. Nonetheless, I think that is useful. Just to go in here, this is potentially where this airstrip here, or this airport, is potentially where the Russians are hiding some of their air defense equipment. And by air defense, what I mean is air offense, because they use those surface-to-air missiles to attack Kharkiv, those S-300s and S-400s, or I'm not quite sure which one it will be, but if it's being kept here, then that has an advantage of being sheltered from Ukrainian attacks by the city of Belgorod. And that also means that when the Ukrainians want to attack the air defense systems that might be there, they're going to be firing things over Belgorod. And then the Russians shoot those things down and they fall inside Belgorod. And that causes debris to fall in Belgorod. And then the Russians claim that the Ukrainians are attacking Belgorod city and try and make a meal out of that. In fact, today there was more footage. I think this is the fourth time we have seen a Pantsir air defense rocket in Belgorod, so the back end of that rocket. I've done the military aid and geopolitics videos for today. I just haven't. They got. I did it all as one. It got restricted because I had some fire-breathing robotic dogs, and the algorithm didn't like the fire-breathing dog part, and so I'm going to have to blur that out because YouTube, and I'll probably cut it into 2 videos now as a result of having to do that, because if I try and re-upload the same video but with it blurred out, it still thinks it's the same video, so I have to change it in a way to get through the restriction. So I probably will cut it up into 2 now. Anyway, just to get back to the mapping, so it's really important that Ukraine are going to be able to hit all of the targets, hopefully, that they can with those HIMARS. And last night there was talk about 40 explosions or so using HIMARS, probably HIMARS rockets or guided multiple launch rockets, actually missiles into Belgorod. I think I wonder whether activity changed today as a result of the activity from the Ukrainians last night. I hope so. That would be good. So as you can see, no change to these 2 areas. Let's go and have a little look and see what the Institute for the Study of War says. And although they talk about, positional fighting continuing, Russian forces marginally advancing, their idea of Russian forces marginally advancing is almost certainly within the confines of where we have the mapping lines anyway. And it probably wouldn't be an advance beyond what Surat Maps has, which is very charitable for the Russians anyway. So I haven't had time to just pick out those geolocations for that area. Just to let you know what I would do, by the way, this is what I normally go and do. Geolocated footage published, footnote 43. And the reason why I like ISW is because it gives you references for what they're claiming. Then I go to footnote 43. Let's do that a bit live here. This is from Gherkin. I'd open that to see what the take the semicolon off there at the end, see what the geolocation is here. And we have that bit of footage I referenced this morning, which it shows a whole number of dead Russian assault soldiers, and that is in this location. So we'll then go back to Google Earth and we will do the geolocation for that. And as mentioned, that's behind the lines. It doesn't show an advance, certainly on what Surat Maps has, certainly on what Deep State Map has. It's behind their line as well. In fact, probably that's what Deep State Map is, or possibly is what they're judging their line on. And then Andrew Perpetua behind there. Now, this can both confirm all 3 of the mappers here. So you've got an assault group that basically died here, and there's a whole group of them that died in a pretty much in a clump and around there, and they that can support Russians controlling up to the Volga River. It can support them controlling up to that point, or it can also support them being in control much further back, and that's an assault group that's attacked through the grey zone and towards Ukrainian positions. So that bit of evidence, although the ISW suggests that this supports an advance for the Russians, it depends where they have their line. And for me, it can support every single one of those mappers. So I'll just put it out there as like, you make up your mind whether the Russians are advancing there or not. But there are some dead Russians in a position that is either well within Russian territory, slightly within Russian territory, or not within Russian territory, and it's in the grey zone. There you go. Anyway, when we go back to the ISW, there are some interesting observations to discuss with you guys. So Ukrainian Air Force spokesperson Yevlash reported on May the 31st that Russian forces rotate groups of 4 or 5 Su-34S or Su-35S aircraft to conduct simultaneous glide bomb strikes against Ukrainian positions and settlements in northern Kharkiv Oblast, and that promised F-16 fighter jets will act as a deterrent to drive Russian aircraft back from the front line. I would say more than the F-16s, what the Ukrainians would be wanting to do is to bring a Patriot air defense system up to near the border here and then hammer the Russian aircraft with the Patriots. They just have to do that. It's so important to protect Kharkiv, to protect the border areas. Those guided glide bombs have been a real nuisance. And by nuisance, I mean having a horrific effect on the border and Kharkiv itself. Then the ISW goes on to say Georgia-based open source intelligence organization Conflict Intelligence Team, CIT, stated on May the 30th that restrictions on Ukraine's ability to use Western-provided weapons to strike targets in Russia have allowed Russian forces to freely operate Lancet loitering munitions just across the border in Belgorod Oblast and conduct an increased number of successful Lancet strikes against Ukrainian forces. This is exactly what I've been talking about. I've been saying for quite a while now, well, since this attack started in Kharkiv or on Kharkiv, that the Russians have had this advantage in medium range attack drones. So the Lancets have been picking off Ukrainian artillery sitting back here, and they've had quite a success in so doing. And the theory being proposed here is that the inability for the Ukrainians to strike across the border with things like HIMARS or long distance artillery ammunition, even though they have been using artillery over time to strike across the border, but apparently that's been begrudgingly accepted by the Americans. They have not been able to take out these Lancet teams. Now, I hope that the Ukrainians will have the intel on these teams to be able to strike them with HIMARS. I think it would be well worth taking out a Lancet team with HIMARS, even though you might look at a few Lancet drones and maybe a couple of operators, hit them with a really expensive HIMARS rocket and say that's not worth doing. Actually, I would say it is, because as ever, when you're taking out drones, you are taking out the potential that those drones can do. This is the mistake I made, and loads of you corrected me earlier. I was talking to you about decoys in a previous video and said, well, you've got a decoy, it has a drone that goes against it, so the drone takes out the decoy, and you're thinking, well, how much is the decoy worth, how much is that drone worth, and is it actually, what's a metric of success here? Is that totally worth it? And of course, loads of you, rightfully, I was just being really thick, loads of you were saying, hang on, it's not about the drone taking out the decoy, it's about the decoy sucking in that drone and using that drone up so that the drone isn't destroying something of far more value. So that drone is taking out an M777 fake howitzer and not taking out the real one that's 2 kilometers down the road, then that is saving that amount of money. So a drone and function. So if the Lancet drone and if a Lancet team is taken out by a HIMARS, then that is an incredibly high value target, because that Lancet team might be experts and they might be using, I don't know, I'm making this up, but 2 Lancets a day, and they might be striking, say, a Bogdana and then an M777 and so on and so forth, and actually you are stopping them being able to do that in the future, and that HIMARS rocket is actually gets a really good return on investment. So really good point there. Okay, so going back to the ISW, CIT observed footage of at least 33 successful Lancet strikes against Ukrainian targets in northern Kharkiv Oblast since the beginning of Russia's offensive operations there on May the 10th. And I have noted on Andrew Perpetua's loss list that there have been, at times, 6 or 7 Lancet strikes on a list in a day. Well, we've now been doing that they've been attacking in Kharkiv now for 20 days, therefore, and there you go. That's easily 33 successful strikes against Ukrainian targets there. A Russian mill blogger that tracks Ukrainian vehicle losses claimed that Russian forces have conducted 296 Lancet strikes in Ukraine between May the 1st and May the 31st. And CIT noted that Russian forces only conducted 178 Lancet strikes in Ukraine in March 2024. In other words, we've seen a massive uptick in Lancet usage. And I noted that to you several times previously. CIT attributed Russia's forces' increased use of Lancet loitering munitions to increased Russian domestic production of Lancets. That's what I proposed, and favorable conditions for Lancet strikes in northern Kharkiv Oblast. CIT stated that Russian forces have continuous surveillance over the limited number of roads and highways in northern Kharkiv Oblast, making it difficult for Ukrainian vehicles to move undetected. CIT noted that Western restrictions on Ukraine's ability to strike targets in Russia have allowed Russian Lancet operators to operate within Russian border areas without fear of retaliatory Ukrainian strikes with HIMARS or other Western provided MLRS multiple launch rocket systems, which has increased the effectiveness of Russian drone targeting. So that is a serious problem. The Lancets have at different times during this war been a significant issue for the Ukrainians. They have really come to prominence again, particularly in this area, but not explicitly in this area, exclusively in this area, sorry. There are Lancets being used in a number of different places to great effect, and Ukraine need to do something about that. They needed to do something about this previously, then for some reason we stopped seeing them. And I don't think it's anything that Ukrainians did, although it might have been some kind of jamming that the Russians have been able to overcome, or they had production issues and have overcome those production issues, and they didn't have enough teams trained up, etc., etc. Whatever it is, they're now back in the zone with their Lancet usage, and that presents a number of problems for the Ukrainians. Okay, so that was a geolocation there. Now, Tim White says here, mixed messages coming from the front lines, according to who you read. But here's one of a military correspondent who says the following. So in the Lipsy direction, and just to remind you where the Lipsy direction is, Kharkiv there, just north of there is a town that the Russians want to take. If they can get as far down as Lipsy and take all of Lipsy, and you've got this kind of conurbation of towns that run along this road southwards. If they can get that far, it means they would have artillery range on Kharkiv there, and that would be a bit of a problem. So anyway, in the Lipsy direction, without any advances by the occupiers, by the Russians, our soldiers, the Ukrainians, managed to push back the enemy by 300 meters in a few days in certain areas, but at the same time, the occupiers are also constantly trying to storm certain areas. The pressure does not stop. The defense forces are actively countering it. Now the enemy is regrouping its troops and thinking about what to do next. After all, they did not achieve the desired result. So again, this is another analyst saying that the Russians have not been successful in Kharkiv. So did not achieve the desired result. Now they need to withdraw reserves from other areas or abandon the offensive on the border of Sumy region. It seems to me that they will not abandon their plans. It will backfire on them, and they even realize it. But they will continue anyway because they are very stubborn. The hardest in Donetsk, it's hardest in Donetsk region. By the way, just to go back to that, and I talked about that earlier. I mean, there is this. I get this sense of the sunk cost fallacy, where you put lots of time and effort and money and resources and human beings into this effort. It has failed. You have the choice. Do you double down and keep going because, we've spent this much already, therefore it can't be wasted, so we need to pack more troops and resources into that area? That is your sunk cost fallacy. You've lost that. You've sunk those costs. Putting more into that and failing again is fallacious. It's not worth doing. It's, get out while you can, cut your losses. So there is an argument that the Russians should cut their losses here, but their military decision making might not be top notch. They've got General Lapin there, who is not, I think, the best of their military commanders, and so they appear to be drawing in more reserves to the area, reinforcements from training and from other areas of the front line. And if they didn't gain an advantage hitherto, then they are they're no more likely to gain an advantage going forward. So it will, one would assume, be similarly attritional for them, unless they're going to change things up. So what are they going to do differently? Well, they haven't really used mechanized equipment there. Maybe they could bring mechanized equipment to bear. But if, as we suspect, the Ukrainians have really good drone operators, Magyar's birds are there. They've been taken from Krinky down on Dnipro, where they caused havoc for the Russians down there, were brought up to here. So Magyar is definitely there. He's doing his thing. If they are operational, then the more mechanized equipment you bring in there, the more likely you are to lose it. So, oh goodness me, it doesn't look like, unless something fundamentally changes, the Russians are going to be wise to commit further forces to there, especially since if anyone's changing anything up, it's the Ukrainians. So what can the Ukrainians now do that they couldn't do before? They can hit those forces with HIMARS and their staging points. So it's got worse for the Russians. Any further committing of troops there comes with even higher risks than on May the 10th onwards. So my opinion is this failed before. It's likely to fail even more now, just from a kind of common sense approach here, unless they do something significantly different. But it doesn't look like that's on the cards. Anyway, going down to Donetsk, this person says it was hardest in Donetsk. It was and will be. Karlivka, Kurakova, Chasiv Yar, Novoherivka, and Toretsk directions. The occupier wants to advance in these areas at any cost. Every day, 1,000 plus occupants are disposed of. Dozens of destroyed enemy armored vehicles and artillery are lost in heavy fighting. If you've noticed, these figures have been around for several months now. This only means that the enemy has sent record-breaking forces into this offensive campaign, which began in October 2023. So the Avdiivka attack and onwards, just been insanely painful for the Russians in terms of their losses right across the categories. And the fact that CL is where it is and not much further away is solely due to the armed forces of Ukraine, the National Guard, the TRO, the Security Service of Ukraine, and all the guys and girls in defense forces. I don't know what it means by the fact that the CL is where it is. The contact line is where it is. Sorry, of course. Right. So there you go. It's hard on the Eastern Front, but wherever it's hard for the Ukrainians, you know it's coming at a cost for the Russians. Someone, I talked yesterday, I said, I like to get them, and I called it micro versus macro. And I said, look, Greg Terry and Pete the Medic and Zhenya, they give you a really experiential understanding of what's going on the front line. And that is, someone really misinterpreted me earlier. They said, how dare you be so arrogant to dismiss what those guys are saying? Dude, I've been with them. I've been there with them. I'm not dismissing what Greg and Zhenya and Pete say one iota. I 100% agree with everything they are saying. Yeah. In terms of what is going on these front lines. What I'm saying is that take that as 100% true, but you also need to understand what's going on for the Russians on the other side of the contact line. And you also then need to understand what's going on in terms of production of weapons and supply of new weapons coming in that could be game changing or at least change things slightly. And understand what's happening going forward for the Ukrainians is very different for what's happening with the Russians. So it looks like the Russians are running out of stockpiles. It looks like their production numbers are not high enough to meet the needs of the attrition and the war. It looks like economically Russia is in some serious trouble. Yes, Ukraine is economically in trouble, but it has 50 nations financially, economically, and militarily supporting it. And as the West, as Europe ramps up artillery production, ammunition production, as UK, as Australia, even as South Korea, possibly, and as the US definitely are ramping up artillery production, this puts Ukraine in a much better position going forward. And the amount of headroom that the Russians have for producing more and more and more gets less and less and less as they ramp up to full scale production. they will be also bottlenecks in the raw materials for this stuff. And what I'm trying to get at is that while Greg and Zhenya and Pete are 100% correct about how terrible things are for the Ukrainians, how desperately they need boots on the ground, how horrific it is in many of these areas, it is even more horrific for the Russians, and the prognosis is bad going forward. It's worse for the Russians than it is for the Ukrainians. Ukrainians have a lot of problems, but the Russians have many, many other problems. Some of those problems are different. So for you, the biggest issue for Ukraine at the moment is energy and energy production. And the Russians showed again last night that they can hit Ukraine's energy production. And that is a massive challenge because it affects the Ukrainian ability to produce the indigenous weaponry and ammunition. They need to have a sustainable production line and production schedule to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and not rely as much on allies as they presently do. That is being affected, as well as the administration, as well as society in general, as well as the economy in general, by the massive attacks that keep taking place on their energy infrastructure. That is where Russia, I think, can get an advantage over Ukraine in a meaningful way. But in many other ways, Russia are in a bit of a bind. Anyway, I keep digressing and distracting myself because me. So sorry about that. Right. This is Surrey Maps that says the Russian army continued to put pressure along the front line and managed to capture some positions southeast of Novosibirsk. Clashes with the Ukrainian army continue south of Berestova, which is practically under Russian control there. So we'll look at that and see where we're at. In fact, I wonder whether there is, where are we looking at here? Novosibirsk there, Berestova. Just wondering if I am in the right place at all here, because what happens is Surat Mats will put out these kind of tweets that give you an understanding of what's going on in certain areas and update the map, often update the map and then bring out the tweets a lot later. And there's often a real big difference between these the map and the tweets. Anyway, here we are. So I've confused myself massively here. We're going to go back to that. So this is Kazimivka, Volodymyrivka. We'll find that on the map somewhere. Kislivka. Anyway, there might be a bit of Berestova. There we go. So that's the Berestova. That's the area where there was some change, I think, yesterday, and that could be the a bit of a delay there, but some changes just a little bit to the south over here, and that might not even be on our map at the moment. I don't know. Anyway, there could be a difference between the timing of releasing the mapping changes and those tweets. But as you can see, Surat Maps has some further changes because that was the only one that they had here. So they're probably due to have some tweets to reflect the changes just to the west of Pikuychansk, across the, goodness me, I haven't said this for a long time, the P66 or R66 highway, depending on how it's transcribed. This is the highway that joins Svatova to Kremina down here. I think it changes its name as it gets further to the north after this junction. So I don't know if it still remains a P66 there. But anyway, west of there are some gains for the Russians in that area, and some small gains a bit further to the south on the way towards the Zherebets River there. Well, that's interesting because yeah, it might split there. I'm not sure about the Zherebets River. That could be it, or that could be it. Anyway, towards the watercourse further to the west there, in the direction of the Oskil River. I mentioned Borova the other day. That was the place that was thought to be the final objective for the Russians as they moved to the west through Ryarodka, Seivka, Nadia. They got then beaten back from there. And there's Novoherivka in this area. So This was where the Russians had some joy and then were stopped by the Ukrainians. It was thought that Borova was what they wanted to get as far as the Oskil River. And this is where you go back to thinking about what's the realistic outcome for the Russian army, and what are their metrics of success, what are their objectives, because that attack didn't even get remotely near Borova. So they've just resorted to now, over the last few weeks, or over time really, hitting that with artillery and guided glide bombs and whatnot. But you think of that attack and how far they got before they had to stop. You think about what they've done up here, how far they got before they had to stop. You think about all these places along the front line that they are inching forward. They are having success, but it comes at such a cost that you then think, well, what's your chance of actually taking the whole of Donbass? Okay, that's all of this area down here. All of that. What's your chance of taking all of Donetsk and the rest of Luhansk? When I mean, Luhansk seems really doable. That's up to this white dotted line that you see coming north to south here. So can they take all of this? Well, it shouldn't be too difficult. But actually, they couldn't even get to Borova. So, okay, it's less far to get to all of to the border of Luhansk. But still, it means taking Makivka. It means taking Nevska. I just don't know that they've even got that in their tank, especially when they're concentrating so many places, and they decide to put 50,000 people up in Kharkiv. But again, I digress. Point is, Russians made some small gains there. I'm not worried too much about that. We come down to the Seversk front line between Belgorod and, well, down here we've got Berestova, another Belgorod. So you've got Belgorod there. Follow the road up to another Belgorod. Anyway, that's Ukraine. There have been these claims about Vasily being liberated by the Ukrainians. I've seen that in a few sources. I've not seen that reflected on the mapping. Nonetheless, there it is. Andrew Perpetua has a Russian line much further back here. He has a Ukrainian line further over to it here. So he actually has the Ukrainians controlling the outskirts of Vasily. Suret Maps has the Russians completely controlling Vasily, and Deep State Maps likewise. And so there is some really big disagreement as to who controls Vasily. But if we come further to the north, nonetheless, some gains along this railway line, working north towards Avdiivka for the Russians. They've been slowly crunching their way along this railway line over the last, I guess, probably year, we could say now. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians appear to have made some gains in the territory north of Vasily. This is quite, as I keep showing you, this is quite topographically interesting area. We have some undulating landscape here, hills. It's not the flat farmers' fields that we see all the way down in Zaporizhia more often than not. There's some topography to contend with here. Ukrainians taking some land back off the Russians in that area. So that's good news there. It's good to see blue pins. Then we come down past the northern areas, Solidar area of Bakhmut, to the Chasiv Yar region. And we can see that there's a few different colors here. We come to Suryat maps will have quite a few changes there, but we come to the ISW, Chasiv Yar. Russian forces continue offensive operations there. Yep. No confirmed changes, they claim. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces advanced to the central and western areas of the Canal micro district, but ISW has not confirmed that. Okay, so what do we have? We've got three areas here. We've got the Avdiivka area, we've got the Canal micro district, and we have the area south that was the sort of Ivanivska sector, but they've gone through that and right up to the canal here. Now, there are many claims that the Russians are actually routinely getting across the canal at the moment, almost certainly in these areas of the culverts. I'm going to bring them up just to give you an idea of where they are. It is quite useful to be able to see them. So these culverts are basically tunnels over. No, that's the wrong one. I've shown you images. I don't want to show you images just yet. Where are you? Riggs and Moore. There we go. press the wrong thing. So these culverts are the most fruitful areas, I think, for the Russians to get across. You are protected by trees coming from the east, and so you can attack here within cover. And then when you get here, you can get mechanized equipment broadly across here without too much trouble because the canal goes underneath. There are a couple of pipelines above the ground that you would have to do something with, right? It comes up very blurred there because of the resolution, but that is a bit of a challenge. In fact, I think I can show you that now with those pictures that JR uploaded. So that might be a good time to remind us of the pictures here. I'm sure it's here. Oh no, that's of the blown up bridge. No, actually, I don't think we do have a picture of the pipes there, but I have seen them anyway. That might be something you contend with, but it's going to be far easier to get mechanized equipment across here and through those pipes, you know, blow those pipes out of the way than it is to get across the canal itself. So that's why you're seeing a concentration here and then a move up through Avdiivka, but they would need to take Kalinina or Kalinivka, as it is also, well, as is mainly known. They would want to get to the culvert there, but the Ukrainians are at the moment stopping them from doing so, and they would find it rather difficult to get through the forest area here without taking Kalinivka. So most of their joy, I think, is going to come down here. That is a challenge, and as mentioned, there are sources saying that they are getting across the culverts or getting across the canal quite routinely. Having said that, the Ukrainians have pushed back the Russians in the canal micro district, as according to Suriyat maps. I would suggest that it was possibly an overzealous mapping initially. But there is a lot of fighting. Andrew Perpetua doesn't have the Russians controlling this. He says they are fighting over a key defensive point at a junction here. It's either there or this junction there. That is apparently a very important defensive position. And if that falls, then it might be somewhat more difficult to hold on to the canal micro district. I don't know too much about the details there. But yeah, they are putting some pressure on this area, as well as you can see north of there. Andrew Perpetua is saying that they've made some gains there over the last week or so, and it's looking like a bit more of agreement with what Suriyat maps has. And then down here in this forest area, according to Suriyat maps, right up to that culvert. So the pressure is, I think, mounting on Chasiv Yar. We've talked about how this might likely fall by the end of summer. If they're starting to get across the canal in this area, then that is a challenge. I mean, the good news for the Ukrainians is that this is all forest in this direction, and it's quite difficult to get. You know, if you move across in an urban area, you can take control of a building, and that becomes a little bit easy to hold on to because you can use it defensively. I think they were saying on Perpetua's live stream last night that you don't have that in these forests here. So actually there's nothing really to hold on to. And so therefore you kind of raid across, but you can't really keep things. There might not even be any sort of dugouts or trench lines of significant ones. And so therefore it's very hard to hold on to that. You have to kind of push all the way through. And so that's why they remain where they are at the moment. That's could be an incorrect interpretation, but that's how I read it. Go and check out Andrew's live stream to get an idea of that. Anyway, that's enough for the map for a second. Let's go back to what you guys are talking about in the chat, and just to give you some big kudos for your support. Thanks, Kevin Forst, for ATP Geopolitics memberships. You are a legend. I really appreciate that. And Johnny Christensen as well, with some Danish love there. Appreciate Johnny's support. So consistent. Really kind of you. John Larkin, good old John Larkin. Thank you. Bugger, no notification, but 99s to you all. 99 flakes. Nice ice cream and flakes for the boys. I appreciate that, John. Thank you so much for your kindness, mates. And a couple more, and then we'll just go through a I don't know if it's a question or an observation. Medieval Pheasant, member for a month. Thank you for being a member, you good man or woman. Brian Ivy, hello ATP and team. Thanks, Brian. Brian gave me an update on where he sits politically today, which was a big sort of 10-point comment that I do feel I have to go back and read with a bit more depth than just skimming it as I did. So forgive me for not having read that in depth yet, Brian, but I will get to it. Right, we have MW Trawler. I think that is how that is pronounced. One thing is the shorter range of the Gimler's rockets compared to the ATACMS. Yep, a bigger problem is that they are much more likely to get influenced by Russia's electronic warfare. Very good point. And this goes back to, sorry to flip around on the map. So let's actually get the map up for a start. That would help, wouldn't it? This is to talk about how, okay, you've got 84 kilometers of range with those HIMARS, all those Gimlers, your basic Gimlers missiles, but I'm just going to get rid of a few bits and pieces here just to clean it up. Yeah, okay, so you can easily hit targets here, but electronic warfare is, these rockets or these missiles are more susceptible to electronic warfare. They have indeed had success with jamming HIMARS over the course of the war. We don't hear too much about it, but I would like to know the success rate and whether the Ukrainians have had to, or the Americans have had to do some tinkering in order to counter the countermeasures. But that is definitely a salient point, to use the word salient in a different context. You see what I did there? And we will go to another comment. So this is why indeed. I mean, why? Let's have a discussion about the meaning of life. It's whatever you make it. Don't let anyone imprint their meaning onto your thoughts. Do you think Ukraine should start a sperm bank for the young people heading into battle in case of tragedy? Wow, it's nothing I'd ever remotely considered, but an interesting point. I believe, door slamming, I believe it could help ease their minds and their families too. Thoughts? What an interesting idea. I love this because this is original kind of thinking, or something I'd not considered. So let's do this. Right. I think this is a brilliant idea. Why do I think it's a brilliant idea? I think it's a brilliant idea because if you are going into battle or going to the front lines as a Ukrainian, say a young man or a man of family making age, and you haven't got children already, maybe you're not even married, don't have a partner, you don't have a girlfriend or whatever, but actually in the back of your mind you're like, meaning of life, one of the meanings for my, it's this, it all works. The meaning for life for me is to have children. I've got this biological urge that I can then overlay with loads of my own ideas, but essentially it's probably an evolutionarily imprinted biological urge to have children, to further my genes. Okay, if I go to war, then that is going to seriously degrade the probability of me being able to do that. And whether I like it or not, that possibly is going to play on my mind a bit. Now, if I freeze my sperm, then, and I don't have a girlfriend or partner, actually, no one's going to go, do you know what I really want? I want JP sperm to further my own family chances or whatever. I don't think any let's say woman is going to do that, right? But if you're in a relationship, girlfriend or wife, then actually that could really allay your fears. You could have a conversation with them. They say, look, if you die, I will have your baby, even if it never happens. Point is that you then feel at ease with yourself. You don't feel like if you die and you hadn't got a baby already, that you will have failed in life. And that would just, I think, help with morale. I think this is a really interesting question. And I think it would be a good idea. And I think they should have discounts for freezing sperm, even if nothing ever happens from it, just to allow these people to have peace of mind going into war. What a great question. Thanks for that. Right, let's go back to going from talking about evolutionary psychology and evolutionary influences on our lives to looking at a map and war. Okay, we're going to come down from Chasiv Yar past Touretsk, which is getting hammered quite a lot at the moment. Touretsk, as I said the other day, to the Avdiivka front line, and we can see that there are quite a few issues along this front line. We have deep state maps showing some changes, quite wide scale changes. But as I often say, when you have one mapper changing and it's adapting to what another mapper had previously said, it doesn't mean that that has happened in the last 24 hours. So Suriyat maps have changed that already. Deep state map has possibly found some evidence to support that previous change. So it's not as if this has all happened in the last 24 hours. May have done. It may have been Suriyat maps being ahead of the game and unjustified in changing their map initially, but actually that has now subsequently changed, and there have been further attacks to consolidate that land being taken in the last 24 hours. That might have happened. But the probability here is that there's deep state maps has found evidence. I saw some talk about this, and it's interesting because I had been thinking this myself, that deep state maps has over time become more, they often make changes that go in line with, and I'd be interested if some of you have felt this as well, that go along with Russian MOD claims and pro-Russian source claims. And I found that quite interesting. So Andrew Perpetua, for me, if I was to pick any mapper here, it would be Andrew Perpetua and his team all day long, right? Because they're not pro anyone. They don't make changes on a map according to who they like more. What they do is they have quite high thresholds for changing the mapping, and they use satellite imagery for shelling, and they use geolocation for vehicles and troop losses and FPV drone attacks and all these kind of things. Put it all to, and news and different sources from different units, and they put it all together, and that's their mapping. Whereas Suriyat maps will be very pro-Russian. It's not to say they're not right; they're often right, but often overzealous and in line with what the Russian MOD say. But over time, I've seen deep state maps move slightly towards that Suriyat maps model. I don't know whether JR's got any comments coming in aligned to that. I don't know if you guys look at the map, the source maps, as much as say JR and myself do. Actually, JR, I wonder what your opinion is on that. More than anyone, probably JR's the guy I want to speak to. Anyway, we have deep state changing there. In fact, all the mappers agree with that anyway. And we have a little bit of a change to Suriyat maps up in this northern area on the way towards Novaya Alexandrivka. Indeed, I think we've got this in the ISW here. So geolocated footage published on the 31st, so yesterday, indicates the Russian forces recently advanced southeast of Novaya Alexandrivka. So this is Novaya Alexandrivka, and southeast would indeed be right here. So let's see what the geolocation tells us. No, that's wrong. Episodes of destruction of Russian MTLBs. So these are like your tractors, if you like, your tracked heavy lifters of Russian infantry, the workhorse of the Russian army, MTLB here. So episodes of destruction of Russian MTLBs in the Prokhorovsky direction, Donetsk region. Strike drone operators of the Unmanned Systems Battalion, the 110th Sister Separate Mechanized Brigade are working, and that's been geolocated to here, the destroyed MTLB. Now, of course, as you can bet, I'm going to say that the ISW claiming there is an advance of the Russians can be read in several ways. And here we have the Russian MTLB there. Now, that's an advance from obviously where they were previously, but all the mappers agree that that's already under control of the Russian forces here. But when they say an advance, you can have an advance of your troops and your mechanized equipment through a field. You are physically advancing. So this is an advance. You can also have an advance on a map where you control more territory than you did previously. And sometimes there's a bit of a smashing together of the term there. And very often, their advance is an advance physically through fields of a column of equipment that then gets blown up and repelled, and the Russians don't control that, although they've tried to advance through the gray zone, And then ISW say geolocated evidence shows that the Russians have advanced. What do they mean? Do they mean that they control that territory, or was it just a movement of mechanized equipment? Anyway, either way, that's behind Russian lines as they stand, according to all the mappers. Further down to the south here, we have now advancing further west of the Derna River. So this was that river from Bedici down to Orlivka and across to Umanska. Now the Russians are inching further to the west on a fairly consistent basis here. All the mappers showing some improvement for the Russian territorial control there in that area. So that, to be expected. In fact, I was expecting them to advance somewhat more quickly through this area as they got up to the river. And you're thinking the river provided that natural barrier, but once they got the other side of it, I thought, well, that's the end of the slowing down of the Russians, because you've crossed that barrier. But no, it's been grinding. And again, that makes me think that the Russians probably don't have a depth of forces around here that they would like. I think everything just comes at a huge cost. We then have topography to contend with the further west they go. There are more rivers. They've got dammed reservoirs here. The Karlivka was dammed here. I'd be interested to know how, because they did blow up, the Russians did blow up the bridge here and possibly the dam. I don't know if this is all as full as it was, or whether the dam is still operational or not. And that was a long time back, by the way. But anyway, the Russians have quite a lot of topography to contend with. And then the further west they go, they will have the actual main Ukrainian fortifications. I'm not exactly sure where they are, though. So they are somewhere around here. They should have been further to the east, but they didn't get to build them in time. Anyway, as we come further down to the south past Umanska, we see that the Russians are filling in the gap between Yasno-Avdiivka and Netalove here, where it gets funneled down to this small area. And I'm not sure how worth it is to have the Russians, for the Russians to take this area, because it comes down to a pinch point and it just becomes a bit of a kill zone. It's only worth it if you control all the land to the north and indeed the land to the south. It wouldn't surprise me if they concentrate on other things more than this in that area, but I could be wrong. There could be other considerations to take into account. And then when we come further to the south, there's Krasnohorivka, there's Mariinka, and further to the west there's Novomykhailivka, and onto Paraskovivka there. No change to any of those, which I think is itself significant. The ISW talks about the spokesperson of the Ukrainian brigade operating in the Avdiivka direction, stating that the Russian forces usually attack in groups of about 6 personnel and have mostly stopped using armored vehicles, but that Ukrainian forces have recently observed Russian forces using Soviet-era T-62 tanks in the area. Yet again, we're faced with another data point that suggests that the Russians don't have the depth of forces that they should do. They're attacking in units of 6. Companies of 6, if they are using T-62s. So they are going back to using you can have T-62, upgraded T-62s that are, the Ukrainians use a lot of upgraded T-62s, OBR 2020 or whatever it is, like a version that is, you don't laugh at that. It's still a useful vehicle. But generally, the idea here is they're using older tanks and small groups of personnel. It comes back to you would if you could, you answer you can't. Like, why are you having to operate like that? Is that optimal? It doesn't appear to be optimal. Therefore, why are you doing that? Because you've got no choice. You wouldn't otherwise do that, which means that the Russians aren't in as good a position as some of the mainstream media outlets might portray them as being in. All doom and gloom for Ukraine. It's not easy for the Ukrainians, but it's not all plain sailing for the Russians either. Okay, then we have some gains for the Russians just to the west of Solodka here, as according to Andrew Perpetua. But again, that is a case of agreeing with what the other mappers already had. So all the mappers now agree with the exact control of the Russians in these fields. That won't be something that's happened in the last 24 hours, but that will be evidence that Andrew and his team have come across to suggest that change is justified. Right, now we're going to come down to the southern front line. There's a few things to note here. One is that there are claims that the Russians are attacking around the Vuhledar area. Special Kherson Cat here says Ukrainian defenders report about a Russian attack between Vuhledar and Novomykhailivka. Quote, and this could be that Solodka area we're just talking about, by the way. The boys repelled a large assault between Vuhledar and Novomykhailivka. A lot of the AFVs, armored fighting vehicles, were involved. 5 units of the AFVs were burned. In a nutshell, burning Russians were running across the field, is the quote. Recently, the enemy has been very active with their movements in the Vuhledar direction. So that is that most likely is what's been happening there. And it could be that the Russians have taken that at, again, as is often the case with the Russians, a huge cost to them in terms of vehicles and manpower. But they've ground on towards that highway that connects Vuhledar to Konstantinivka. This is the worry that the Russians are going to take Konstantinivka, get along this highway, then attack Vuhledar from the north. But even this is taking forever and a day. They lost at least 320 vehicles, the Russians, around Novomykhailivka. It's just so painful for them to take anywhere. It's difficult. And this goes back to the idea of, well, neither side, I don't think, can make huge military breakthroughs unless you are using a phenomenal amount of kit to do so. And I don't think either side has the ability to do that going forward. You know, the production, the training, the equipping is just not going to happen to the point where you are going to make massive breakthroughs. For me, any kind of breakthrough, if you're hoping for a Ukrainian breakthrough, it will be facilitated by a massive degradation of the Russian forces by HIMARS, Storm Shadows, ATACMS, attack drones, medium range drones, short range FPV drones. You do that for 6 months. And at the same time, Russia's production of maybe oil, refined products are hit by drones. Their economy gets done and they start losing the political will. That's when you can formulate some kind of sensible plan for a breakthrough. But again, it will be hugely costly for you as well, like for the Ukrainians to do that. But what you'd want is the Russians to be either on the edge of retreating anyway, or in the process of drawing back because things are not going well elsewhere. All things remaining equal, if Ukraine were to build up a big enough force to do a significant offensive maneuver, it would just be massively costly for them, all things remaining equal. I think it's very difficult to militarily break through on a large scale. It has to be in line with all these other things, and that's why F-16s are really important. What you ideally would want is for Ukraine to wrest back some air advantage. I don't think they'll ever get air supremacy, but if they're taking out these air defense nodes all around the place, if they are shooting down somewhat regularly Russian airframes, then the introduction of the F-16s can help Ukraine to push back the Russians and get some kind of military advantage, maybe some sort of breakthrough. But that breakthrough has to come with so many other things in place. Now, the second thing to mention about this southern front line is Nestoryanka, which is... Actually, that's over here, is it not? Nestoryanka. So there we also have some gains up towards, where is it? Cherivne, yeah, Myrna here. Some small gains very small really, just to the west of Myrna. But it's all about Nestoryanka here. A lot of people talking about this being a new axis or new sector that's opened up. So if we look, or if we just put Nestoryanka into, say, Twitter, we can see lots of people are talking about it at the moment. Max24 saying Russians have opened up a new section of the front in Zaporizhia, according to deep state maps, west and east of Nestoryanka. So that is to say Nestoryanka west there, but also possibly east of Nestoryanka. We've got Orikhiv to the north there. Again, it could be the kind of Russian approach to probing here, there, and everywhere. looking for a weakness to exploit going forward. Further down, we have liquidation of military potential of Russian troops at Nestoryanka. So the Ukrainians are hitting back with their drones, as you would expect. Attack on a new sector to the front. The Russian army advances west of Robotyne. That would be Nestoryanka. Russian troops attacked on a new section of front line in Zaporizhia region to the west and east of the village of Nestoryanka. Potentially, the movement could be aimed at entering the rear of Ukrainian armed forces units located in the Robotyne area. That could be just keeping the Ukrainians on their toes as they are moving troops around to support, maybe up in Kharkiv, maybe think about Chasiv Yar, maybe think about all these other areas. The Russians then attack somewhere that Ukraine is not expecting. Then it's making, this is how you keep the initiative. So what you do, if you're Russians, what you don't want the Ukrainians to do is control the battlefield anywhere where they are doing things that make you go, oh, I need to change what I was doing and I need to now move to react to what the Ukrainians are doing. The Russians, by doing stuff here, for example, are forcing the Ukrainians to adapt to what the Russians are doing, to react to what the Russians are doing. That means that the Russians have the initiative. When I talk about how the Ukrainians need to sit back for 6 months and absolutely hammer the Russians behind their lines with all the stuff I always talk about, they will need to keep the Russians on their toes by attacking in certain places to keep the initiative, at least tactically in some places, with themselves, with the Ukrainians. They don't want to just sit back and say, we're going to hammer you, but you can do what you like on the front line, because it means that they have to always react and the Russians get to dictate what is going on, so on and so forth. I hope that all makes sense. That is what's going on the front lines. I did want to show you a video by an excerpt. I would have, if this was my normal mapping update, I'd show you an excerpt of Andrew Perpetua's live stream. What he talks about in this first part of the bit I was going to show you is that the Zaporizhia defenses, the fortifications that have been built, and there are supposedly 3 lines of fortifications that go right across here. And I've actually said this before myself. The best fortifications in Ukraine, I think, are in Zaporizhia. This will be the most difficult place for the Russians to attack, as well as it being the most difficult place for the Ukrainians to attack, because look at all the fortifications that the Russians built. The second best area, Andrew says, is Sumy, actually, interestingly. So up here, over the border. And then really the weakest area is, unfortunately, the area where the Russians are attacking the most, which is the sort of Donetsk area down here. They are hectically trying to build up fortifications as much as possible, but this is one of the weaknesses of the Ukrainians, is that they didn't do a good enough job of fortifying over time, really well planned and constructed defensive lines with deep trenches, organized in a decent way, and so on and so forth. However, they do have that down here. They were also talking about, I don't know if it's, I will try and play it to you. I wonder if I can remove this, and then, hello, you can see my face. We are going to present to you a screen, which is going to be Andrew's video. So let me know if you can hear this. You should be able to hear this. I'm just going to forward it on to the losses part.
It's possible for them to do it, unless Ukraine, that's a catastrophic failure of leadership or something. Like, Ukraine would have to, mass abandon positions or something like that. So these little advances, I think, are just not even worth caring about, to be honest. If their lines of defense were that good in Donetsk, then Russia would be in a lot of trouble. So Ukraine's best lines of defense are in the south. Their second best are probably in Sumy,
which is what I've told you.
And the next best is Kharkiv.
But I think they go on to talk about some losses in a second, which I wanted
lines of defense, especially
you to hear.
Donetsk used to be their best line of defense, but that was all over here, which is all captured. So they still have Toretsk in New York and Pivdena and this area, which is an outstanding defensive position, but all of this area behind Avdiivka is kind of trash, to be honest. But it is what it is, I guess. So, do you want to talk about Krinky?
I think I've missed out the bit where they talked about losses. Anyway, you get the idea. He's talked about the defenses there. That wasn't quite what I wanted to show. I wanted that to be the part where they talk about the sort of things I've been talking about at the recently, which is the long-term prognosis for Russia against Ukraine, and they were kind of talking about the same sort of things that I've been talking about myself. But anyway, I've cocked up the timing of that. But there you get a sense of the defenses built up around Ukraine. Right, we'll go back to some of the comments. Just a massive thanks to Rick from the Netherlands, super sticker there. Really appreciate your support, matey. Thanks for that, buddy. Kevin Showell saying, considering the Russian Orthodox Church needs to explain all the floods, fires, etc., how do they spin it? As it seems a bit like biblical retribution. If we go to see what the pastors say in the US, it's like it's the gays what did it, right? It's God, punishing the world for sexual deviancy or something. Right, you're speaking to a philosopher of religion. I could very much bore you about how you try and justify that. Of course, if you believe in an all-loving, all-knowing, all-powerful God, what's called the classical theism, then all of this, and if you know the future, all of this is just playing out exactly how you want it. So whatever terrible things happen on Earth, it is precisely because God has sanctioned that and knows it's going to happen and has designed it such that it will happen. So whatever terrible things ever happen, if you really believe in that kind of God, you have to say it's what God wanted. Otherwise, if he didn't want it, you would have changed it. So that hurricane, we couldn't stop the hurricane. We couldn't stop the tidal wave. He could have stopped it. He didn't, so therefore he wanted it. I don't know. And it's why I don't believe in that kind of entity. Anyway, you can read loads of my books on that. It's probably not the right place to talk about that. So I probably annoyed a lot of you in saying that. Sorry. Brian says, Russia will continue to attack because commanders will lie to general staff about progress and casualties. Of course, I've talked about this previously, Varanyo, I suggest you go and watch Perun's excellent video on Varanyo, which doesn't help the Russians at all in their decision making. So Varanyo is BS, right? Well, it's not just that. It's this process where you go. So say Brian is my boss, right? I go to Brian and I say, right, that money you've given me to do training for my troops. Well, here's a report on the training. Here's what we've done, and here's how I spent the money. Reality is I've pocketed the money, done a half-assed bunch of training, which is not what the report says. I pass this report to Brian. Brian looks at it and goes, I know, his thought process is, I know this is BS. You, Jono, you know that I know this is BS. And I know that you know that I know this is BS. This is a merry dance we have. It's BS. You've given me that report, but I'm going to sign it off because that's easier and that's how we operate. And I'm probably pocketing a bit of that money as well. And then I go and take my report based on a number of these different reports, or Brian takes all these reports and goes to his boss up there and says, JR, I've got all these reports. I know the BS. JR looks at him and says, I know the BS. I know you know the BS. I know that you know that I know the BS. And then this goes on up and up and up and up and up. And this is Varanyo, the merry dance that the Russians do. And it's what happens when you've got endemic corruption throughout all the structures and all the hierarchical levels of, in this case, the military, but it's probably going to be every department in the country. And when this happens over time, then this is just a way of doing things. This is baked into the system, but it also means that you have, or you're never quite sure exactly what the reality is, exactly what's going on. On paper, you've got all of this army, which is supplied with all of this equipment. And then at some point, someone needs to make a decision. But when you make a decision, you're making a decision based on the information you have at hand. And if that information is basically contingent upon a whole process of BS, then garbage in, garbage out. You are going to make a decision that is ostensibly BS because it's based on a system of endemic BS. Now, what happened at the beginning of this war, and I wrote articles on this for Only Sky, that Putin made decisions that were insanely bad. He invaded a country, a sovereign nation, expecting them to welcome his soldiers with open arms and with bunches of flowers. This is literally what they thought would happen. How can someone think in that position, think that was genuinely going to happen? I wrote an article that said, how do I have a better grasp of the and a better intelligence, if you like? I don't mean like intellectual intelligence. I mean like intelligence gathering. How can I, sitting in my study in the south of England, have better intelligence on what the Russian army would be met with than the Russian army, than the Russian supreme commander? Well, what's going on that he could get it so wrong, to miscalculate so badly what would happen if he invaded Russia, that he would invade invade Ukraine? Like, it's insane. So he invaded because he didn't invade in a warlike manner. He had literally a special military operation whereby he was trying to unseat the government in a 3-day brisk operation and clear up for 15 days afterwards. And it failed. And he accidentally got into a war that he hadn't planned for. So then what happened is, we planned for a special military operation. That didn't happen. We didn't have a plan B. So we had to invent a plan B, because then we were, the Russians, we were accidentally in a war that we had no strategy for, no planning for. And they had to make it up on hoof. And then they had to say, oh, goodness, right, we're not going to take the whole of Ukraine now. Okay, what are we going to do? Okay, let's take the whole of the Donbass and everywhere up to Dnipro River. Okay, we failed at that. Okay, let's take Kyiv. Oh, we failed at that. Okay, okay, oh my goodness, let's take the Donbass. We failed at that. Okay, let's take Bakhmut. And they had to scale it back each time because they had got it all so fundamentally wrong. Now, that happens because I would submit to you that happened largely because they didn't have a real handle on what was going on in Ukraine. That Putin is surrounded by yes men who would tell him what he wants to hear, tell him the most rosy appraisal about what's going on both in Ukraine, but also importantly what's going on in the army. They had been doing these reforms since, what was it, 2008 or whatever. You had Shoigu supposedly leading these reforms, and Gerasimov there, and turning the army into battalion tactical groups and on more of a kind of NATO style of doing stuff. And it was all a bit of a shower of shite. Again, hang on, guys. I thought our army is supposed to have this many tanks and this many trucks and this amount of fuel. Why is this not happening? Oh, that's because all those reports I was getting given, those people giving me those reports have been taking the fuel and selling it off and making some dosh out of it. Okay, so the reality is that the corruption and the lying has led to a fundamental miscalculation of what's going on, and we are now where we're at least partly because of that. That's my reading of the situation. I don't know if it's your reading of the situation. I don't know if I've gone off on one. Russia will continue to attack because commanders will lie to general staff about progress and casualties. And in exactly the same way, they'll present reports to their commanders because they don't want to be seen as, cocking up, doing things wrong. And then they will collate those reports and send them up and up and up. And then Russia think you could have this situation where Putin genuinely thinks Russia are doing much better in the war and have been doing much better in the war than they have been doing. And what happens, again, this is totally my speculation, but what happens is reality catches up. So every so often, Putin must get a reality check where it's like, what, we've only taken Bakhmut in a year. Like, but you've been telling me And I've been thinking, and I'm under the understanding that so on and so forth. So eventually you get reality check, and then you probably reconfigure, and then you just get another 6 months of BS, and then you get reality check. But at some point, like, reality will win through. Like, you can't dupe yourself from reality for that long. So at some point, the Kremlin and Putin have got to come to grips with the fact that Ukraine has been a failure of a project for them, and their economy is getting tanked, and they're losing friends around the world, and their international influence among certainly with the West is waning, and they have become something of a pariah state. That at some point they've got to own up to that and face the reality of that. And I don't know if that has happened behind closed doors. I don't know if this manifests itself in a kind of national realization of that, and a national realization that Putin has screwed over Russia, and you get some either coup d'etat or some like public uprising. But the problem is you don't have, many of those people who would be ripe for public uprising have already done that, and they're in the gulags and detention from at the beginning of the war when they got up in arms, or they left for foreign shores. And you're left with a pliable population that are likely to do cognitive dissonance reduction, which is where I believe that we're awesome. The evidence is looking crap. How do I harmonize this? Well, I will keep with my faith that Putin's the right guy, and that that Russia is amazing, by saying, well, those Ukraine Nazis deserved it, and entrenching, saying, well, screw you, the West. As you get more and more isolated, you become this pariah state. You become almost proud of that. Yeah, you guys are just all degraded sexual deviants, and you all suck, and Russia's great, and we can be great on our own, and we'll sit in our own kind of little bubble and talk about the good times of the Soviet Union. And you might get to that stage, but you are still going to have people going, hang on, how come our dams have broken and we've flooded? Like, why are we spending all this money on this war? Why are we not spending it? So there are still like general people across Russia who are getting really discontent with the state of affairs inside Russia, because they are spending money in all the wrong places, and this war is not going well for them. Sorry, I've just been going off on one. Goodness knows what you guys are thinking. Luckily, I'm not reading the live chat. Right. John Larkin, at least the West grows a pair and will smash the cock rumbles. I hopefully we seem to be doing it very slowly, but we are kind of getting there, because we're afraid, or I say we, the collective we, people like Jake Sullivan, Biden administration, Schultz administration, the Italians, I think, often don't get enough mention, but they are supportive, but they are compromised with their own political administration going on, a coalition of three parties, two of which actually support Russia. They, for example, are one of the few countries that said no to striking inside Russia, sorry. And so I don't think we give enough criticism to Italy, given that they are one of the big four nations in the EU. I think France and Germany are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Spain aren't, and Italy are sometimes strong on the rhetoric. Giorgia Meloni is good, but could do an awful lot better, and that's down to the very difficult political situation that nation finds itself in. But yes, I think we're just getting there slowly, aren't we? Keith Kane, thanks, mate. Such a keen supporter. Can we do a fundraiser? Treats for the frontline guys like Pete, Zhenya, and the frontline heroes. It may sound silly, but as a chef, sometimes a treat can transport the mind for a few minutes. Oh, interesting point there. I have a flag that's come from King Dog, was once King Raccoon, that I'm going to raffle off at some point. It's been, I'll sign it myself. It's got signatures from the front line. That will be for the next fundraiser. We are in the process of getting some Medivac vehicles, these 4 Snatch Land Rovers across from the UK to Ukraine. That's been successfully fundraised for. At the moment, Greg is sorting that all out, and he will be helping to drive them out soon. JR's hit me with an idea of doing fundraiser for a NAFO truck. That would be pretty cool, but I don't want to also stop being able to fundraise for everything that Greg and Zhenya do as well. So I need to work out how to treat that one. But yeah, I certainly need to push some fundraising going forward. Thanks for that. John Larkin again. Thanks, John. I really appreciate that. Shine on you, crazy diamond. I am shiny at the moment, quite literally. Thanks, mate. Really appreciate that. Para Andy, super sticker. Thanks, mate. Really appreciate your support. You've been here for the long haul. JR says, questions for JP can be asked in the chat and will be forwarded to him by the great man himself. Mitchell Henry, says, do you think that the Russian summer offensive has already begun or not? Here's the question. Yeah, I can't help but think it has started. Like, it's really difficult to wonder where they're going to get the resources for some kind of major offensive beyond what they're doing. Really, they need another 200 to 300,000. Now, we've heard from people like, is it Sersky or other people in the military saying they are intending to raise 200 to 300,000 people, but I don't know that they can do that effectively without a mass mobilization. Otherwise, it'll just come in dribs and drabs over time through their kind of conscription and then turning them into contracted soldiers and trying to nick people from abroad and all these kind of ways that they're just doing all the time anyway. And I think that is more likely to lead to something like Kharkiv, where you've got 50,000 possibly poorly trained people that you're throwing in with a lack of equipment. The signs at the moment are that the Russians are using quad bikes, motorbikes, and golf carts. And you're thinking, again, you would if you could, you can't, so you aren't. So either they are doing that because they're stockpiling all their equipment for a massive push, but then the Ukrainians would know where that equipment is. You would have the intel on that, you would have the satellite imagery, and we would probably know about it. I'm not sure that we can expect anything more than what we're seeing. I don't know. Am I wrong? What do you guys think? I just then think I'm being too hopeful. Surely Russia have more to throw at the Ukrainians than this, but I just don't know where it comes from. Yeah. Thanks, Deputy Dog. Hello, ATP Geopolitics team and Jonathan. Keep on keeping on. Been offline for a couple of minutes fighting cancer. Best of luck with that. I mean, that is a battle that is a tough one. Got it beat for now, but it's a battle you've won. Well done, Deputy Dog. Really good news. 3 treatments left and on to maintenance. Good to see you all. Thanks for that support and good luck, and I hope that remission remains. Many of you know, I had stem cell therapy for my primary progressive multiple sclerosis, which is the multiple sclerosis. It just gets worse until you can't move and die. I went to Russia in 2019 for stem cell therapy because the Moscow clinic was the best in the world. They didn't offer it on the NHS at the time. They do now. They do it in Southampton down the road. But anyway, I had to fundraise a whole load of money to go and do that. I don't think I qualified to get it done in Southampton or elsewhere on the NHS in the UK. However, hopefully it will be more widespread in the UK. I had that done in Russia. I wouldn't probably be on their good boys list to go back and get that done again or now. However, I do understand, fighting these illnesses and hoping you just get the best treatment you can. And I had chemotherapy for that. So I had no immune system for a month. I was in isolation. And I had a wonderful, wonderful experience in Russia from having that from a very good team. So just to remind some of you or let some of you know, I will check that private chat out. Thanks, my good man. Images I was searching for. I will now find those images. So this is the Chasiv Yar images of, thanks for that, mate, of the pipelines, I presume, that we were talking about in Chasiv Yar. So if you remember, I was saying that the Russians are at the a canal, and they're fighting their way across. There is some, I'm going to continue reading. There's some images of pipelines. So this is, if you can see that there, you can see the canal. That's what it would look like. It doesn't have a huge amount of water, that the canal in Chasiv Yar. So it isn't as problematic to get over as you might think. But you have also culverts where you have these two, you can see those pipelines there. See if I can make that even bigger for you. So you have some pipelines that going across the regular terrain. You would have to blow your way through those. But that's, I believe, what the Russians have been able to do is get across in those pipeline areas. Don't know if there's any other footage there, but thanks for that, JR. That's perfect. Really appreciate you doing that. Let's get back to the comments. Just a few more, and then I'll let you go, guys. So here's one from General Consensus. It appears that the US and Ukraine clearly saw the buildup of Russian forces in Belgorod in April. Did you see this buildup? Did Ukraine respond appropriately? Were they surprised? They knew it was coming. I don't think there is they didn't get the fortifications built well enough in the right places, and there were things that were unfulfilled, like those piles of dragon's teeth, etc. But they have, I think, effectively stopped them now. So I guess they were somewhat prepared, but probably they didn't know when and where it was going to come exactly. I don't know how good their intelligence is in terms of satellite imagery and whatnot, but I presume that since we knew about Belgorod, we would be hearing, just to link that back to what was previously asked, we would be hearing about further buildups if the Ukrainians knew about them. And we haven't been hearing about that. So I don't know that there is a serious summer offensive that is beyond what we're already seeing. But anyway, so some interesting comments coming through. Right, there are lots. Interestingly, well, actually, this is, so Mitch says, I got my swimmer frozen in 2003, but going to Iraq. So this is actually an interesting idea about getting your sperm frozen. If you have only just joined the conversation, you're probably thinking, what the hell are we talking about? This idea of Ukrainian troops getting their sperm frozen to give them a sense of well-being before going to the front lines. Actually, that's something that other people have obviously thought of before in other conflicts. So really interesting. Thanks for that. There was an article, says Cheryl, an article about Ukrainian men saving sperm. There were legal complications, though, as I recall. It was a while ago. So this is obviously something that's been well discussed before. Kevin Force says, JP, is there any word on the 58th Guards on Combined Arms Army? I heard many of them were refusing to fight because General Ivan Popov, their commander, was arrested. Yeah, I've not heard anything about that since. He was well regarded general. He's been arrested as part of this purging of the military underneath Shoigu. Shoigu was moved sideways. Wondering what's going on with Shoigu. Is he vulnerable because all the people under him seem to be arrested for corruption? Popov was arrested for corruption involving the selling of scrap metal, but the understanding I have is that scrap metal, he generally was doing that, but that was to raise money for his own troops, and that's why his troops like him. It's to give them the right equipment and so on and so forth. He's well regarded. He's been arrested. Shoigu hasn't been, and he's been moved into a position which appears to be still quite important. So he's not the defense minister, he's the advisor to Putin, but he was taken to China recently on that big diplomatic mission to one presumes would be to get extra equipment across from China. Now, it was him, there were others there, there's Belousov, there were other key players that went with Shoigu. What's interesting is that Shoigu's been in place since before Putin. He's been involved in, state administration since before Putin's time. He is an old school one. He has got a stickability, and there must be some value. He must have some value to have been around for that long. And he's, I think, a safe pair of hands for Putin, as in he's loyal to Putin. Now, I think some of these purges are happening possibly with this could be a clear out being done by the FSB. And then you're wondering who pulls the strings in the Kremlin. I've been wondering this. I've spoken to you about this before. Like, is Putin a puppet of the FSB, or does he control the FSB? He's come from the FSB, but he wasn't particularly a strong person. People think Patrushev was far more likely to run Russia than Putin. Putin was an odd choice of person to put in place. Boris Yeltsin, like, he plucked him out. He became mayor of St. Petersburg, and then, you know, he's been president and prime minister. Is he someone that is easily manipulatable by the FSB? Was he initially thought to be that, but actually he became a powerful ruler in his own right and kind of outgrew his usefulness to the FSB, and then is someone that himself now controls the FSB? Like, what are the power dynamics there? Lots of questions that I don't know the answers to. But for Putin, Shoigu is certainly useful and loyal. I don't know how useful he is in terms of actual kind of intrinsic value and decision making. But anyway, I digress. Right, Martin Flynn, Johnny, what do you say? Russia has 140 million people. Ukraine has 41 million. Who runs out of reserves first? Well, yeah, this is an obvious question that Ukraine will run out first. Difference is Ukraine is fighting a war it has to fight necessarily for its own existence. Russia doesn't. So if you're sending, even if you're forcefully sending Ukrainians to the front line, that has a different flavor to forcefully sending Russians to the front line just to fulfill Putin's own megalomaniacal and narcissistic intentions. So I think there's a difference there. And that may give you an indication of a difference in a threshold. So when do Ukraine reach that threshold where the population go, hang on, that's enough, we can't do this anymore? Because if they're fighting for their own existential future, then there's perhaps no end to that process. There is no threshold. We will fight until the bitter end, right? That's what the Ukrainians might say. We won't be forced to go to the negotiating table. It ain't going to happen. You can walk into Lviv before we give up, right? So there's that element. Now, where's the threshold for Russia and for the Russian population? So yes, they've got 140 million versus 40 million, or even less now. But actually, that is a situation that is so very different for the Russians, because if those body bags keep coming back for those Russian family members and friends, they don't say, yeah, we're in this to the bitter end. We are gonna fight until there's no one left in Yakutia for that Ukraine. That's how much we want Ukraine. And so the thresholds, I think, are very, very different. Ukrainian threshold is up here, and the Russian threshold would be way down here. So they can have 140 million people, but it doesn't mean that they will chew through that many people at the same rate as the Ukrainians will. And therefore, they will just naturally win because they've got more people than the Ukrainians. There's so much more to consider. Then you've got the production capacities. Then you've got the economy, and then you've got 50 nations supporting Ukraine. How many nations supporting Russia? There's so many things outside of that calculation to consider. Hopefully that sort of answers that. John, stop it, mate. Major argument with the missus from why, yes, it's the 5 live babies or 500 sperm samples in a fire. Who do you save? Oh my goodness, I've written an article on this. I don't know if you're even referring to this, but there's a really oh my goodness, this is where we get onto what personhood is. Don't do this to me, John, because no one else wants to hear about this. But the idea that you've got a human being at a fertilized egg point, this embryonic point is nonsense. And we know it's intuitively nonsense, because if you said, I've got 5 babies here, live babies here, and I've got a box of 10,000 fertilized eggs that are frozen in this laboratory, there's a laboratory on fire, do I save the 5 babies or the 10,000 Petri dishes? And you know damn well every single human would save the 5 babies. In other words, there's a massively discernible difference, or at least intuitive difference, between 5 babies and 10,000 fertilized eggs. And so that whole personhood argument that these are human beings at embryonic stage is problematic. I've written so much on personhood and that argument. Don't make me go down it, because that's a 5-hour talk I will give you. Anyway, there's just, if that's the thought experiment you're referring to, I'm just explaining to people what that is. Javier Alvarez, such a great supporter, sends me stuff on Twitter that's really useful as well. Thanks, JP, for all your hard work. This was the coffee fund. I need it. T, he says, yeah, I need that because I've got no voice left, and I've got to let you guys get back to your I don't even know what day it is, Saturday evening. Finnish guy, best channel ever. Thanks, mate. I really do appreciate that. John Panciotti, who does this. John, thank you. Slava Ukraini from the people of Puerto Rico. Thanks, John. It's insanely generous, and it does. That's sort of, all of you guys do allow me to keep doing what I'm doing, and hopefully providing a service for you, and hopefully a service that makes the world just a little bit better in some small way. That's always my intention. I won't be able to answer all of these questions now, but there's still a lot of talk about sperm going on. Yeah, Aussie Burger. I think you're right there, mate. Finnish guy again, Slava Ukraini. Thanks, mate. Really appreciate that. The Weasel with 5 gifted ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thanks so much, buddy. And John P, who's an incredible support, always owner comments. JP for PM. I don't wish actually. Some people have asked me, personal thing here, whether I would run politically, and in fact I was asked to run by a political party some years back, and I think I would get really frustrated with having to deal with local things. In other words, like potholes in the street and people coming to me and saying, oh, can you sort out, and the waiting list at my doctor's surgery is too long. And I'm like, I'm a big blue sky, I'm a big ideas thinker, so I'd be more interested in being in charge of policy for a government, even probably more so than being a prime minister. Like, that would frustrate me in terms of I can't do these things because my hands are tied in all these different ways. But yeah, anyway, that's my idea about that, but not to be so presumptuous that I'd even have the acumen to do any of this. Right. I've not heard anything about this, Tom. Has JP mentioned the latest $6 million aid package from the US announced yesterday? I've not seen that at all. Am I operating on a different dimension? Yes. John, stop this. That's right. For the diesel, for the snatch wagon, spent a long time with the SLR in the back of them. Right, that's for the diesel, for the snatch wagons. Okay, so I'll pass that on. Thank you very much, John. We are still open for donations. In fact, they're in the description below for helping out with Greg and Zhenya's work that they do in Ukraine, and that's really super important. Stupidity in Essence, thanks for your Danish support there. Thanks for all the videos. Really appreciate that. Right, okay, we are now coming to the end, and I've missed out a load of really good questions and observations. And let's just see. So the NATO position is still looking for a new leader. Interesting. I don't know if you're referring that to me. So Marcus Luboshka says, it's also surprising that Putin does not dare use Stalin's conscription on a big scale, but has to use money as main incentive. For all his love for Stalin, he must be too scared to try go that way. That's the issue, is that you mobilize 500,000 people in Russia and you've got economic suicide on your hands. And he must know that. They're economically on a precipice at the moment with a shortage of labor that's phenomenal. You then take 500,000 people out and you have got major popularity issues, you've got major discontent, and you've got economic suicide. So there you go. Are you planning to meet Greg the next time he's going out to Ukraine? Possibly not the next time, but I do plan to go out again. I really would like to. I'm trying to get through some of these. Why do you think other countries have asked Sweden to wait with Gripen? Seems like Ukraine wants them. Saw today in the news that President Zelensky has asked Sweden to train pilots. I've not seen that either, but it wouldn't surprise me. I don't know what the ins and outs are there, but it could be that there was some issues with people running the F-16 side of things, and then asking Ukraine for something, and that maybe they said, "Oh, we can't do that because at the moment that's involved with the Gripen things," and there's some frustration there. It's like, well, look, if you want us to expedite F-16s to your country, you need to focus on us. So you need to put that Gripen stuff on hold. But actually, Ukraine just want all the help they can get, and they want to fly both airframes, and they want to do everything. So I guess it's going to be something like that, but I'm sure that Sweden will want to be selling or giving Gripens to Ukraine so they can advertise them, market them, and yeah, I'm sure Zelensky would want both Gripens and F-16s. And finally, Richard Bennett gifting 5 memberships. Really kind of you. Thank you very much for that. Again, I've not seen the $6 billion aid package, so that's insane that I haven't seen that. I'll have to check my sources. Anyway, that's clearly enough from me, guys. Thank you so much for your support. John, never be sorry for your own beliefs. Thanks, mate. As I do spend an awful lot of time trying to justify them, by the way. My beliefs are very rarely just plucked out of my posterior. Keith says, thank you for answering, JP. ATP Geopolitics, we can load the snatch vehicles with the treats like chocolate, tea, coffee, snacks, etc. Absolutely. And I'm sure Greg is going to be loading that. I'd reach out to Greg to see what he plans to put in now. I know that they are going to be fully loaded with fuel and all sorts of bits and pieces. They're going to have the latest anti-drone technology or the best that we could find, I believe, loaded on top. So that's a really good project that you can continue to support. Anyway, thank you very much, guys. I just a big shout out. I don't know if he's going to be watching this. I'll probably say it in a video tomorrow. Alan Doherty, who's someone that's been on the chats recently, but actually I think it's his wife partner, don't know, who's doing the commenting. He seems to be a veteran. I don't know if he's unable to type or talk or whatnot. I don't know what the situation there is, but apparently he's getting some joy out of these videos. So, you know, big love to him if he is listening or watching this. I don't know what the situation. I don't know whether I've completely misread that. But anyway, thanks to all of you who do watch, veterans and non-veterans alike. I'm amazed that people with military knowledge and acumen and experience follow me, considering I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I'm just amazed that you guys are here and actually still here. It's I don't believe in miracles, but if there is a miracle, that's it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your support. Take care, everybody. Thank you for the incredible support on this live stream. Thanks, John Larkin. I'll be passing some of that support onwards. Thanks to John Panciotti and all of you guys who've made this an incredible journey for me. And hopefully we will continue to support Ukraine in all the ways possible. I will be starting up another fundraising initiative, either with Greg or possibly doing a NAFO truck. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the threads on either this video or future videos as to what you would like to see. Really appreciate, again, all your support. Take care, everybody, and speak to you soon. And John, just stop it. Just stop it. Thanks, mate. Take care, everybody. Toodle pips.